The natural daylight, if we go back to our schools that were designed at the turn of the previous century, long, tall windows, a lot of, that you walked into classrooms and they were much higher than they are now, big windows. And we always designed schools traditionally to be grand spaces. They were meant to be reflective of universities and city halls and grand libraries. And while they were modified for kids, they were still grander spaces. And we tend to be much more efficiency driven. So I like your thinking about the natural daylight with durable window screens. And I love the idea that the window screens could actually be projection space. So that way you could have more than one wall being projectable wall, or you could even think of those as being tackable. So I don't know if it's possible to create a screen which essentially is tapeable or tackable, so people can, maybe just those big post-it note, poster boards, kind of post note, where you could, but I think it's interesting to see that screen as having more than one purpose. So I really kind of applaud that. The durability, so kids, what I like about that is not literally the fact that the kids will pull them up and down, but from the very beginning, everything in the space is co-owned by the students, because generally teachers handle the thermostat and, the screens over the windows and such. And I think it's really interesting to say that it's not so much because they're young and they're going to break it, but you're going to have multiple folks who don't own the space are going to have to it's going to have to be built so that multiple people can use every element. And that's interesting. Probably the biggest question mark on here is it's a cost issue, but the reality of being able to change the sound quality. They do have stereo systems that allow sound to be focused almost like a laser, so that you could sit in 6 square feet without walls and the sound would be directed right at those individuals. But that would be cost prohibitive for a younger age. But I love the idea. And I think it's being thoughtful that whenever we use spaces in more than one ways, when we break folks away, is how do you minimize distractions? And it may be that furniture can be arranged so that when kids are sitting, there's sort of a natural block up to a certain height. And again, I think kindergarten teachers have thought of this in lots of ways. So I put that as a question mark now, just because that's a much more expensive engineering issue, or it's a matter of playing with furniture in such a way that it kind of softens the kind of lateral sound. It also means ricochet, how sound ricochets off walls and ceilings. The height adjustable and the movable surfaces, to me, that's an absolute lovely bit. There's a couple things that come to mind. One is a Steelcase, which is kind of like Herman Miller, a big furniture design company, who happens to own IDEO, which happens to work with IDEO in the D School at Stanford. Just designed a new chair desk unit that really emulates what you're talking about. And what was interesting is they really said these chairs have to move as individual items, but they have to also line up so that you could have one big, so we have 2 desks, but they really ought to work so you have one big space for collaboration. So they really looked at a number of things. I don't think they're perfect, but they are thinking the way you're thinking. And I think that idea of height adjustable, and also that kids can adjust them. So it's not just the teacher presets them. I'll tell you one thing I find. I was with David Jakes, who's a well-known ed tech guy, and we were doing a thing on similar than today's session recently. And he's been painting all of his walls in his library and sort of all of his school spaces he has access to with something called Idea Paint. And essentially what it is, it's paint that turns any wall into a whiteboard. So it creates that kind of glossy, easy to erase. And we also started talking and said, why wouldn't you paint the tops of your desks with that as well? So instead of saying to a kid, don't write on the desk, actually make the desk writable so that they have to write. So every surface becomes writable. So while that's not specific to the height and movable, I think it's intriguing when we start going back to that first bullet point, that every surface is its own purpose, meaning it's a vista, it's transparent, it allows daylight, but it also can be blocked and also be presentable. And I think the same thing with tables and desks is how can they provide multiple experiences. Randy Fielding and Prakash Nair also, they've actually designed schools, in fact a couple in Minnesota, where each student is given their own permanent workstation, more like in the cubicle, the professional setting. And for a kid, that's powerful. For an adult, we hate cubes, but kids love cubes because it's like their own bedroom. They really want to turn it into something special. So instead of lockers and every kid in the classroom has space, they have this kind of like home base they go to, and then they move from space to space depending upon the size of the experience. Wi-Fi enabled, I absolutely agree, and I think that just has to be sort of ground zero. Obviously, most elementary school teachers don't tend to do a lot, but I think when you get into digital storytelling, the classroom as stage becomes vital as a podcastable, vodcastable, global 24/7 sort of presentation zone. Wi-Fi is critical. Performance area, I would shift from a stage that's where the speaker's up on a stage to an idea where the audience can go up on risers. And I only throw that out as a way to take the exact same situation and flip it around. Because if you have a stage and it's only used for just presentation, that's a lot of square footage that gets used up unless it becomes a reading area, unless it becomes, and sometimes it's just as interesting to allow the audience to sit at different heights and the speaker can be more at ground zero, which also allows eye contact between the kid sitting and the teacher, and that's often the arrangement, or a sitting teacher and a standing kid. It allows them more to eye contact at the same level. But I don't say that as an instead of, but more as an expansion of the original idea. Storage units that double, absolutely. The great weakness, and it's more of a human use issue than it is a design issue, it's so often teachers will just take any handout that is given by the school or a calendar sent by Scholastic or anything, and they'll just suddenly tape it to one of those flat vertical surfaces, and 6 months later it's still there. And it had about 3 days worth of value, and then 6 months later it's just taking up random wall space. And I think you're almost into this idea of how do we teach what would be permanent display space, what would be almost like a gallery where it becomes a kid gallery, but it changes constantly. Often teachers put everything at adult height, because they're standing and wherever their eyes are becomes kind of that upper third of the room, and they put the posters there. But a kid sitting on the ground is never going to look at it, and most of the times at a desk, never going to look at it. And they put the alphabet way up high, and the President of the United States way up high, and it's just a weird use of space. And I think it's interesting to start thinking of the walls as being kid height or kid scale versus the adult teacher scale. And I just put that in as a thinking point. I love ample space. I think ample is a lovely word because instead of saying I need more space or lots of space, ample says just enough. And a good boat builder, a good captain of a homemade boat or a hand-built boat doesn't need much, but every square inch is used intentionally. And often when we have big spaces, we just fill it with stuff. And we don't really use it well, but when we have tight spaces, we become masters of that universe. And so I like ample because I don't want to say it's eco-friendly or green, but it's sort of of a line of whatever the resource, whatever we must have, we do. It's a matter of things having more than one purpose. So I like that. Stations, I really like that. I love that we're unlocking the teacher desk and moving more to administrative. And I think the wet station is just like Wi-Fi in the windows. I think it's one of those, if you can pull it off, it's kind of a non-negotiable. Now, it could be that a wet station could be in the hallway and shared by multiple classrooms. It could be that it could be kind of you have a classroom and a classroom, but in between is this mini space that becomes kind of a wet, messy zone, and the kids from both classrooms can use it. So there's lots of ways that can be done. You also can create an indoor-outdoor arrangement where that wet space becomes kind of a transition, becomes a mudroom and a messy transition for growing plants and collecting things, and it's a more daylight-specific space. But again, that's when you can do things from the very beginning. So a lot of good stuff in there, and if I would say sort of thematically, again, I love the word ample. I love that surfaces and spaces have multiple use. I love this focus on presentation and performance. So those are, and then Wi-Fi and water and light being non-negotiables. But if I were to go thematically, those would be that. I like adjustable, agile, durable, ample, presentation, stage, etc. Those are elements that to me are really powerful for classrooms. So now I'm going to shift to the other, and then you guys got to get to work.